So, good morning, everyone. We will continue what we started yesterday. And actually, yesterday we dwelled in pretty deep waters. Right, we just jumped right into these deep waters of discussing why in the Kabbalah do they call the godly energy the godly light. And we tried to explain what is the novelty of light over influence, which could be another phrase to be used for energy, because both are about some type of influence, actually. And the reason what we explained in short was because light is more like a reflection, less a focused material being given over from someone to someone else. It's just a reflection, almost like an automatic reflection. And we said that is why it's more suitable to describe godly energy, because we can't really describe godly energy in a way like a focused influence, because any influence that is given over from the influencer to the influenced, is that the right word, I guess, is first of all something that what was the word we used for mugdar? How did we translate it? It defines the influencer, right? He gets all caught up in what he's doing, so he needs to focus on it. It's not something which is automatic. It comes after a decision and after being focused on who is he giving it over to. And also, it's such an influence is always something which is complied, which means complied is something that is made up of a certain describable materia. So that's why the best way to describe godly energy is to say it's like a light. Same way the light of the sun is a reflection of the sun, is not something which the sun does in a conscious matter, in a conscious way. It's not up to the sun's decision. It's just something that happens automatically. The sun is not busy with reflecting itself. So too, the godly energy which comes out of the infinite essence of God is not something that makes God busy or keeps him defining him, or it's not even something, hi, good morning, it's not even something which is complied of anything. So for example, if God is infinite, his reflection also will be infinite and undescribable. It's something which is part of it's just part of the God's being. So here we ask the question, though. Okay, fine. So if God's reflection is not something which can define God, or not something that is complied of anything, it's just an infinite reflection of God, does this mean that God is also forced to give this reflection, similarly to the sun, which is forced to give its light, right? The sun, though, doesn't make a decision about giving its light, but it also cannot make a decision to give or not to give its light. So he said, no, on that matter, God is different. His light is a reflection, but in a way which is a conscious reflection. And that's really something hard to understand, because if it's a conscious reflection, then it's not a reflection anymore. But just that's the way it is. So this was an introduction to this idea of light. And if you didn't fully grasp the idea, don't worry about it. We can consider this as a parenthesis in a more general topic. But what we are going to speak about today is about this phenomena of light, which is something which is pretty common in Kabbalistic texts, as well in Chassidus. It's used, this idea of Or Hashem, God's light, is something which constantly keeps on appearing in these texts. And it's important to understand the general idea, what is behind this idea of light reflection. So in general, if you didn't know this differentiation between this concept of Shefa and Or, between influence and light, you would just say light is like an energy, like a reflection, like an energy that, or any type of revelation that comes out of some place to somewhere else. And in general, in more general terms, without all the details that we discussed yesterday, so without getting into all the details that we discussed yesterday, in general, the Chassidus speaks about the Ma'or and the Or. The Ma'or is the source of light. The thing that lights up. And then there is the Or. The light itself. So, in general, this topic is also touches upon the idea of revelation. So, any revelation that we're going to have is contradictory concept. Why? Because what happens in revelation? Is revelation a step towards the infinite, or is revelation a step towards limitation? What would you guys think? Just in general, not even about God. When you reveal something, are you freeing limitations, or are you adding limitations? I don't know if my question is understandable, but I hope it is.
Isn't this kind of like what the machlokas between the Maharal and the Rambam was, where logic is inherently limiting because it creates an orderly system, and revelation is essentially God providing order to us?
Yeah, good point. Very good point. It's a very similar idea. So in Chassidus, I'm not only speaking about godly revelation. Any type of revelation is a contradiction, because on one hand, you reveal something which before wasn't revealed, so you're freeing limitations, right? Beforewards you were more limited because this thing was not revealed, and beforewards there was less, and now there is more, right? On the other hand, for any revelation to exist, you need limitations, because in order to reveal, you need to put it, as you said, in order. You need to put it into words. You need to have the materia, the medium through which you're going to reveal. Something which is unrevealed doesn't need a materia. It doesn't need substance. It's untangible, so it doesn't need substance. Something which is revealed needs substance to catch on to, like the fire needs something to catch on to, right? So, for example, let me give you an example of revelation, which is not in a godly realm, in a human realm. So let's say I'm a poet. Poetry is really not my strong side, but let's just say, for the sake of the argument, let's say that I'm a poet. So I imagine the way a poet writes a poem. Obviously it doesn't work this way, but let's just slow down the process of how he writes a poem. So the poet walks down on the street, and something falls on his head from a construction site. And when that first thing happens, he's in a shock. Then he gets upset. Then he starts thinking about how come this can happen in 21st century, that you walk next to a construction site and something falls on your head. And then he digests this experience for a few days. Then he thinks that there is a message here to be given to humankind. And then he figures out, well, I have to put this into a certain context. And he starts to think about the poem. And then he actually writes down the poem, which has words, lines. It has, rhymes. So what happened here is there is him. He's the mower. He's the source of reflection. And the poem that comes out of him is his reflection, right? That's the light. So that light existed in him as well. The light was there also in the source of light. But in order for it to come out, it needed something to be caught onto. It needed the materia to cut onto, to get caught onto, to be dwelled in. So without the materia, this would not be able to be revealed. In this case, what is the materia of the light, of the reflection?
The construction site.
No, because that's not the revelation. The construction site is the source, what arose in him, the revelation. The revelation is, okay, I'll speak more a little bit about this metaphor. So his revelation is his feeling of despair and frustration of the irresponsibleness of humankind, and that's what he's writing this poem about. This feeling. So this feeling is the light. What is the materia through which this light is revealed?
Well, he writes a poem.
The poem, the words of the poem. So the words of the poem are the materia, and the feeling which he reveals is the thing which gets enclosed into the materia. Without words, he cannot express his feelings. If you want to express something, you need to put it into more tangible materia, right? On the other hand, the words themselves, without the feeling, are nothing, are meaningless, inanimate things. They're there. They're blah blah. So you could have words without a meaning. Not even words, even just letters without a meaning. It's the materia, but without the light inside. So if you look now, we said there is light and there is the materia. The light, in order to reveal itself, to come out of the source of the light, needs to enclose itself into what we call in Chassidus kelim, the vessels.
So actually it's like the kelim is the vessel, because I
Kelim.
understood like vessel, that's the body, let's say like a human being who receives this light. I mean, so what's the difference between this kelim
I'll explain.
and vessels?
I'll explain. So in general, I just gave one example. And in this example, you can divide the poem. You can say what is the light of the poem and what is the vessels of the poem. The light of the poem is the message or the feeling that the poem is trying to give over. The vessels of the poem are the words and the rhymes. The words and the rhymes of the poem. But actually, what Chassidus tells us, that every existence has this double identity. In every existence, there is a revelation of that existence, as the revelation of the existence has these two sides. So you can say, like, the body is the vessel and the soul is the light. You can say, anything you're going to find in existence, which is revealed, because you're actually speaking about revealed things, any revelation, anything that you can have a clue about, you can divide it to the light and to the vessels of the light. So it goes for everything. There's oiros v'kelim, the lights and the vessels. So let's speak about, I am upset. I have a feeling of being upset. That's the light. When I reveal this feeling, I'm going to need to have some kelim in order to reveal it. I will need some vessels to reveal it. So I can scream, for example. Or I can throw a bottle at somebody. That will reveal my feeling. So the feeling is the light, and the tangible action is the vessels. Let's even speak on a higher level. For example, when we explained, this is not literally, but when we explained the 10 Sefirot, so we said there is Chokhmah and there is Bina. What was the Chokhmah? Chokhmah was like the essence of the idea, right? We said that's the lightening that suddenly lights up your eyes and you get the main point of the idea. That's the light. And Bina is taking this idea and applying it and taking it through and understanding it. So that's more like the kelim, that's more like the vessels. So Chassidus says in everything in the world, you can divide it to light and to vessels, which the light enclose themselves in. So actually we can add to this drawing, we have the Mor, the source of light, the Or, the light itself, and then we have the kelim, through which the light comes through. And then you have the receiver, Mekabel. So for example, the most famous example given for this is the master and the student. We use this example ourselves many times. The master and the student. So the master is the Mor, he's the source of light. He gives over an idea that's the reflection of him. He needs to give over this idea in kelim, in certain words, parables, metaphors, stories. He's giving over an idea, a very lofty idea, to make it to be receivable. He needs to put it into vessels. And these vessels are the medium through which the receiver will accept and absorb the message. Now, let's take this, that's clear so far, right? Not very complicated. Now, let's say that you have a master and he's teaching university students, like here, but he also teaches kindergarten children. And he's giving over the same topic. What changes? The light or the vessels of the light? The vessels, right? So you can have the same light come through different vessels, and that makes the change in the light towards the receiver, but not towards the source of the light, right? So you have the same master, the same teacher, teaching the same topic. So the essence, the light of the topic is the same. It's the same source of the light, it's the same light. What changes are the vessels, and the vessels change the light towards the receiver, based on what the receiver can accept or cannot accept. So, for example, the teacher is not going to become stupider because he simplifies the idea towards more simple students. It's not like, oh, I cannot explain it in such a complicated way, I have to explain it in a more simple way, and then he needs to decrease the level of complexity in this idea, and suddenly he himself realizes, oh, I just became stupid. I became like simple, like my students. That doesn't work that way, right? The teacher doesn't become the ma'or, the source of the light definitely doesn't change because the light goes through different vessels. And not only that, in the truth of the matter is, even the light doesn't change. So the essence of the light stays the same. It doesn't change because the vessels differ, right? And so you can be teaching kindergarten students, elementary school students, high school students, university students. You're giving over the same topic. You're not going to change. The message is not going to be changed. What is going to be changed, the way the receiver hears the message, and that's because of the vessels. The vessels change. And just like if there's a story there's a story in the Talmud that once a heretic is the word? Heretic? Once a heretic asked, I'm not sure, probably Hillel, one of the sages in the Talmud, and he said to him, how does it work that, I think the question was, once it says that God was upset, and once it says that God was patient, and once it said that, so you have many gods? You have like the merciful God, and the upset God, and the smart God, and the great God, and how does it work for you guys? And the rabbi answered him, let me ask you something. When the sun lights into a room through a small window or through a big window, does that change the sun? It's the same sun. So you can have the same sunlight coming through a different angle in the atmosphere, or a different type of glass, and you're going to see something else. It's going to seem to you that the light is different, but it's the same light, and it's definitely even the same source of light. So the ma'or and the or doesn't change. The vessel changes through which the or gets revealed. For example, even in taking this even to a bit higher level, speaking about you, there is you, your essence, and you reveal yourself in many situations towards the outside world. You can reveal yourself through being very accepting and very nice. You can reveal yourself through being very strict. You can reveal yourself through being very smart and understanding, but it's the same you. What changes? The mediums, if I look at these attributes like mediums, so the mediums change, but you yourself stay the same thing. And actually your revelation as your revelation, not the revelation of being upset, but your revelation is also the same. So why is this important? Because this is how Kabbalah explains how come God creates the world and he doesn't change. God creates the world through the kelim, through the vessels. The vessels are the 10 Sefirot, ultimately. There is many vessels, but ultimately the most basic vessels are the 10 Sefirot. And these 10 Sefirot differ the light. They can give different colors to the same light. Which means the light doesn't change, it's just the vessels that make the light look different. So if I look, this is an explanation also to the fact that how come we have different worlds? We explained in the Kabbalah there is different worlds, there's 4 worlds, right? What makes these worlds different? What makes these worlds different is the vessels through which the godly light is revealed in that world. So for example, in our physical world, the godly light is mainly revealed by the physical existence, the physical existence. So that makes God look very, different than if I was standing in Olam HaYetzirah and seeing God through some very spiritual medium. So this is the way the Kabbalah explains how come God stays the same. What changes is only the changes of the way his light is perceived. So there is a term in Hasidus which is called Oires Pshutim Kelim Michodim. Which means the lights are simple, the vessels are specific. Which means anything you see in any world, it's going to be ultimately the same godly light. If you see it different, it's only because the vessels changed. So, the kelim, we said, the vessels are the 10 sefirot, and basically any medium through which godliness comes through, but these are the most basic vessels. Mm-hmm. The most basic example for or and kli, for oiros v'kelim, lights and vessels, is speech. We mentioned this in the beginning of last week, just very briefly, that speech is made up of two things: the toichen of the speech, the content of the speech, and the words that make that speech receivable. So in this case, the content is the oiros, the lights, and the words are the kelim, are the vessels. The question is, where do these letters come from? What are they? Because, and let me paraphrase this question now in the godliness. I was waiting that you guys are going to ask a question. You're going to say, oh, this is great. So God doesn't change, right? Because it's only his light, the way it's being perceived through the vessels. But what are the vessels? They're also from God. Where do they come from? It's like an outside existence, outside of God. It's like, how do the vessels happen to come to exist? Like, where do they just pop up from? So it's a similar question. Is clear, everybody? I hope everybody's a little tired, myself also. So I'm like half sleeping while I'm talking to you. But so again, the question is: we try to explain that God himself doesn't change. He has a reflection. That reflection is not a so-called conscious reflection in the sense that he's like focusing on reflecting himself. No, it's just like almost like an automation. He's not forced to do it, but it comes out of him automatically. Everything that gets created through this light. But what makes the creation differ, one creation from another, for example, is the vessels. So what changes is really just the way his light is perceived. Good. But where do these vessels come from?
From God,
Yeah, but how did that happen?
I mean, he created the vessels.
Yeah, but how did he create the vessels? We explained, you're right, we explained that we created the vessels. That's why we explained that he created in himself the attributes, the 10 Sefirot, in order to create the outside thing. But through what did he create the vessels? We just said that every creation is done through the light coming through the vessels. But in order to create the vessels, he needed some other vessels to create the vessels. You get the problem? So it's like How you say this? Gikör? Yeah, I used this once already, this last week. It's a vicious circle. We have a problem here. Got that? Everybody gets the question? So here, I'm sorry, we're going through a lot of topics that we should be studying for like weeks, but I just want to give you a lot of information, and then you can.
Would you place it as a vessel or intellect? Like
intellect depends. As I said, in every piece of existence, you could break it up. But so on one hand, I can say that the intellect, the medium of intellect, is a vessel, because what gets revealed through the intellect? You, right? So it's your reflection comes through the intellect. On the other hand, in intellect itself, I can say that there is oiros v'kelim. That content of what the intellect is dealing with is the oros, and the specific way to express that concept is the vessels. So in everything you can have oiros v'kelim. But now if we take this to the godly level, if I say that God created the world through the light, so he's untouched, he doesn't change. Even his light doesn't change. Why are the receivers changing or seeing him in a different light each time? It's only because of the kelim. Where did the kelim come from? How does that happen? Everything is clear? Okay.
All of these things are finite. I mean,
the kelim are finite. They have to be finite in a way, because if they, what do the kelim do? They, as Sam said, they make an order in the light. They say, now the light, when you hear an intellectual idea, that has to be a finite idea, right? So intellect is finite. And when you hear, or when you see a revelation of love, is also finite, because it's a revelation of love and not a revelation of gevura, of being strict or upset. So it defines the revelation. The kelim, the vessels, give the revelation a certain color, a certain brand, a certain finite characters. Okay? So, in order to deal with this problem, we're going to go through now, how does the creation happen? Let me reveal to you how the creation happens. So, the Kabbalah says, before the creation, there was only him, and his name. Him is the godly essence. His name is the godly light. What was the existence? Says the Kabbalah. Everything, the godly light filled everything. Right? Meaning, God exists. Not only exists, but it reflects his existence. And there's nothing outside of it. That's everything. Okay? So everything was him and his name. Everything was him and his reflection. Now, there's a problem. Why? Because in order to create something, you need to have a space for that thing. If the whole space is filled with him and his light, then where are you going to have, in what space are you going to have creation? So, I'll give you an example. If there are people that their reflection is very strong. Like they walk into a room and everybody goes like, like great people with a strong charisma, or very smart people. So when they walk into the room, everybody will contract themselves. What? Shrink. Yes, and they will not try to open their mouth. He's totally emulates them. He makes them nothing, because he feels the whole room. his reflection doesn't leave space for any other reflection. Now imagine that this guy is not only like a strong charisma and has a strong reflection, but basically, what is he? He's everything. So if he's everything, there's really no place for anything else. So if God is everything, we just said he's the infinite everything, and his reflecting this idea that he's everything, then there is really no space for anybody else. So what is the first thing that needs to be done? The first thing is what we call tzimtzum. So tzimtzum happens, and how does the Kabbalah say, what is tzimtzum? Tzimtzum in the literal sense means contraction, I think. Contraction. So he contracts his light. And the Kabbalah uses the term silek es oiroi hagodol al hatzad. He shoves aside his great light. Like to say, he makes a little space for the creation. So he silek oiroi hagodol al hatzad. Which means he shoves aside his great light. Okay? So he needs to make space. He needs to make space for creation. So the next thing that we come to, that once he does tzimtzum, there becomes a makom panui. That's free space. What is it called now? A safe space. You know this term? Safe space? What is this idea of safe space? Free space? That in this space, God's revelation is not felt. Because that's the place where his revelation won't be felt. Now, but the problem is, we still don't have anything. It's just that his reflection doesn't bother other things to become. But it's not like we created anything yet. So what do we need? We need now to get some contracted light into a vessel, and through that vessel to create. So let me say this in a metaphor. Let's get back to the master, teacher, and the student. So the master teacher is like a really, really, really smart guy. He's a genius, and he's had his school with these very complicated, very lofty ideas. He wants to teach to the students. So what is the first thing he needs to do? First thing he needs to do, he's go, just forget everything. Let's clear my mind, right? That's tzimtzum. He's clearing his mind. Again, by clearing his mind, he doesn't become stupid. It doesn't change him. It just changes his light, right? So he shoves aside everything is in his head, and he says, okay, let me focus now. Who am I going to teach? So I'm going to teach elementary school kids. What's their level of understanding? What is the level of intellectual capacity? Let me measure it this way, okay? So I measured it, and now let me try to figure out a metaphor through which I can take one idea of mine and pull through that idea, this metaphor, and give it over to them through this metaphor. Once I did that, they received my light, and everybody's happy. So, same thing is true in creation. God is infinite. His light, his reflection is infinite. He shoves aside his light, first to make a makom panui, a free space. Then he needs to figure out to have some kelim, some mediums, some vessels, and bring through his light again through, but already now, not in an infinite way, but in a way that they would come through these vessels, and on the other side they would come out to be a finite light. Was this understandable? A little bit? So now he has the kelim. These are the kelim. The vessels. And he's bringing through his light through the vessels. Now, once they go through the vessels, they create the creatures. So in the metaphor, when the master shoves aside his great ideas, then he takes a certain metaphor and through that he brings one topic and explains it to his crowd, his target crowd. He doesn't create the crowd. They're able to receive what he has to say. In the godly realm, this actually creates the receiver. You understand? So in the metaphor, we just speak about the receiver receiving the material. Here, through this process, he actually creates the receiver. Like imagine if the master would go through the same process, and when he starts speaking, the level he speaks, that's the type of crowd he would fill the room with. So what changes the reflection? The vessels through which he speaks. So these are the kelim, and they create the pictures, and then we get into this Seder Hishtalshlut, which we drew up 2 days ago. The order of chains of we called it helix, right? Of the 4 worlds and the 10 attributes returning and coming back and again on a different level. This is already everything is after this, but here there's a process of changing his light through first having a tzimtzum, and then putting it through the vessels, and then the light coming through the vessels already in a finite way. So the light that comes through the vessels, it's called Or Hakav. Or Hakav means the measured light. Measured light. Why is it called measured? Because this is already not just a reflection in the way that is just reflecting the infinite godliness. It's a light that is measured and is coming through the vessels. Now, so let's get back to our poet, right? What's the light in this metaphor? His feeling of distress and frustration of this terrible world that we live in. So it's a really untangible feeling. In the beginning, what happens? When is this light the strongest? When he has the experience, or when he writes a poem? What do you guys think? When is it stronger?
It's the same.
It's the same? Everybody agrees?
Well, it depends. I mean.
What?
It depends. I call it inspiration, so to speak. So
Inspiration.
Sometimes it comes immediately, like this. Sometimes later, when you think about it.
Yeah, but okay. Let's say that you have the inspiration. When is this feeling that is in the inspiration stronger? When the inspiration arose in you, or when you wrote down the poem?
No, when you actually work on it, I think.
Yeah. What do you think, Sam?
I think that people have I view it as kind of a chicken and egg thing. I think people get struck by inspiration all the time, but it's only the strongest inspiration that actually pushes you to start working on something.
Yeah, but once you worked on it and you wrote it down, so when is the feeling stronger? When you had the inspiration or once you wrote it down?
When you had inspiration.
When you had inspiration, right? I agree with you. Why? Because what happens is, you walk down the street and this brick falls on your head. You're extremely upset. You're so upset, you can't even express it. You're going nuts. What is your first expression? Ah! You scream, right? Then later on, somebody comes up to, what's wrong? And you can't even find the words. Then, like a few minutes pass, and you catch your breath, and then you say what happened. And only way after that, many days after that, that you just let your feelings come down a little bit, you can think it over, and you can find the right words to express it, and then find the right rhymes to express it. So actually, when you wrote it down, it's already a measured light. It's a measured, finite revelation. When you had the feeling at first, it was so strong that was even almost like unrevealable. It was because you didn't find the vessels to reveal it in. It was so infinite that was almost impossible to express it. So the strongest level is unrevealable. You need to you first need to put that very strong feeling aside, and you need to find the right vessels to express it. So this is the same process that we're talking about here. There is the God, the infinite godliness, its reflection, which is also infinite, its light, which is infinite. And this light first needs to be shoved aside. Then we need to find the vessels through which this godly light will come through. And the creation that happens is based on not just the energy, but through which medium does this energy come through. Like similarly, you have electricity. I'm not a big electrician, but the electricity is the same. So why is it that electricity gets revealed in the form of a light bulb and also in the form of a Tesla car moving? It's a totally different type of revelation. It's a totally different type of experience. It's not because the electricity is different. It's because the medium through which electricity gets revealed is different. So it's going to look different, but it's the source and the energy is the same. So the godly light is the same. What changes the vessels that change this light. So now let me ask you a question. What would happen if God would just take away this whole process and reveal his original light the way it is? And we would see his original light.
Well, if you believe, that there is this infinite light, we wouldn't be able to face it.
Yeah, so what would happen to us?
Well, I don't know because I don't want to sound stupid.
No, I'm saying, and logically what would happen?
Probably it's unbearable.
Unbearable, that's exactly the point. And we mentioned this one. So if there is, I told you once this idea when we spoke about creation on one of the first days, that if you say a story and you create a whole list of characters in the story, and there's a whole drama in the story between the characters, it's all in your story. So once you would reveal that it's just it's not reality, you would see that the author is the reality and not the story. So if you would see God's infinite light, we would actually see that reality is just God. We wouldn't feel ourselves. So if we wouldn't feel, as you said, it would be unbearable. We wouldn't be able to have the basic feeling of ourselves because we would just feel him. So it's important that God, just similarly to the teacher, if he would reveal what's on his mind, it would be unbearable for the students. They wouldn't stop existing because they are separate existence, but they would go like, this guy is nuts. They wouldn't be able to receive it, right? Because it's infinite, almost. It's not infinite, it's only a metaphor, but it's an infinite. So this is why we need the kelim, and the light needs to come through the kelim. It needs to come through the vessels. So, sounds like a pretty good system. But still, we didn't answer, so what are the kelim? What are the vessels? Where do these vessels come from? So let's say you have electricity and you have the light bulb. The electricity and the light bulb, they are two separate entities. We just connected them. We plugged in the light bulb into the electricity. So you can say, yeah, the electricity reveals itself through an outside medium, which is the light bulb. But when we speak about God revealing himself in the creation through the vessels, then where do these vessels come from? They need to also come from somewhere. Right? You guys get the question? So the Zohar says, Iyu v'chayeyu chad Ihu v'garmaihu chad. Which means him and his life is one. Him and his vessels are one. Now in this, the him and his life means his light. Like it means life in this case means like energy. Him and his life, him and his energy are one. Him and his vessels are one. What does this mean? It means many things. We're just going to go for the simpler explanation. It means that the same way you're not asking where does the light come from. It's obvious to you that the light is essentially nothing else than just a reflection of the source of the light. So, same way, the vessels, the godly vessels, are essentially don't come from another place. They come from God as well, right? So then how do they become vessels? I hope you guys are with me. Let's get back to our example. So we have the guys, this teacher, and this teacher is speaking. He said in his speech, what is the light and what is the vessels?
The light is idea and the vessel is language or words.
Language and words, exactly. So the idea comes from him, no question. It's his idea. What about the words? Where do they come from? Right? So this is because if we say that the way he speaks, the way he gives over his light is only a matter of which words he's using, right? Then what changes the whole revelation is only the vessels change the revelation. The essence of the revelation stays the same. And we need to understand where do the words come from? Where do the words through which the light comes through, where do they come from? So where do they really come from? Like in a person, where do the words come from? Like they're just these building blocks. So right? I'm using the same words you are using, right? So it's like an outside thing that I need to. Same way when I build a house, I go to the store and I buy blocks. You can go to the store and buy blocks, and you're going to build one house. I'm going to build another house. Same way, language just comes from an outside source. So where does language come from?
God created the possibility. This is the attribute of human being. It's the language. Yeah. You're mixing in here God. I'm just speaking on the human level. The human, just let's perceive language. Where does language, where the words of the language, where do they come from?
Like, why does it happen that I speak? What's the source of my speech? Let's say communication, and there's other forms of communication, right? I can use I can change my facial expressions, right? So my face and the content of my communication is two separate entities, right? But what about when I speak and I'm using literal words? Where do these words come from? So, interestingly, the Chassidus says that the source of the vessels, ultimately are from the light also. Which means that basically somehow, when you speak, the words that come out of your mouth are not a separate entity that the light comes through, but are somehow part of the light itself. And I will give an example that Chassidus uses. Chassidus says, let's go back to the master. Let's go back to the teacher. Teacher has this unbelievably lofty idea in his head. It's in a form of light. Unperceivable light. It's like infinite almost. Obviously it's not infinite, but it's like a very untangible. He wants to give a lesson, right? What did we say he needs to do? He needs to shove aside the whole complication of the whole thing. He's like been thinking of it and now he's like, okay, let's put the whole thing aside. Let's start from the beginning. First, let's clear the table, as we say. Let's start with a clean page. Let me write down first what I want to say, like the main points, right? And then he gets focused and he thinks about who is he going to speak to, what is he going to say. And I'm sure you guys all have already in the past prepared the lesson. The way you do it is this. You know so much about the stuff. First, you have to put everything aside. Then you say, okay, let me see who am I speaking to. Let me put down just the main points. And through that, you're going to say what you're going to say. Now, let's imagine you're this guy. And you have these really deep thoughts in your mind. And now you're saying, okay, let me shove all these deep thoughts aside. What stays there after you shoved? Right the second after you shoved everything away. What stays there? We said nothing, right? We said free space. Is it really free space? Or is there something that actually stays from the original idea? So Chassidus says, when you have a great light and you shove it aside, interestingly, you will have some little traces left of the light. Like, not real elaborated sentences, not even words, but just little traces, which then you catch on, and that's what you're going to bring your light through. These little traces are called the oisios harashim. Letters of traces. You know, when it's like almost like when somebody writes himself notes. So he's not going to write a full sentence, all elaborated and everything. He just writes like when we were children. My grandmother used to use something which I don't know exists in the English language, but it's Hungarian, it's called Gyorsírás. It was a whole wisdom of how you can write a whole sentence with is there something... What?
practicing shorthand or?
Shorthand? So that was like this, in Hungarian literally means the fast writing. So it's that you can write words or also sentences with just a few letters. It's not and you can save yourself time. You could take notes in a way that you afterwards are able to read. Actually, anybody that knows this type of writing will be able to read. It's basically like codes. Instead of writing a full word or a full sentence, you can use these codes. So these codes are not real sentences. They are not real information. But they are codes through which then you can build up the information. Now, what happens when you have a great idea in your mind and you shove it aside, something stays from it. Some type of traces stay, like a code. I'm trying to think of an example when you try to think of like a very complicated idea, let's say, that you would. That you don't even fully grasp, but you have like a short, condensed code for it, like in physics. For these very complicated ideas, you have like a short code that somebody looks at it and is like, what is it? It's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. This short equation doesn't mean it's meaningless. But for you, it's like these traces that you can then take it and fill it up with content. You explain what each code means, and through that, it's like a way to remember it. Instead of writing down the whole long concept, you can just use a short combination of numbers and letters, and through that, remember what the basic idea is, right? And this is what stays after the light is being pushed aside. Why? Because really the letters are part of the light. The letters are also part. They come from the light also. So, if so, Hasidus says, Kabbalah says, the vessels. How do the vessels get created? Here, in this process, when we had the light, then we had the tzimtzum, then we had the vessels through which the light came through again. Where did these vessels come from? They actually came from the tzimtzum. They actually came from shoving the light aside. You are left with the oisus or shimu, with the traces of the letters, and what we wrote down before. And these are actually the basis for the vessels. So when the godly energy comes through the vessels again, these vessels are not a stranger. They are parts of the original light. Okay, I think we can have a little break, unless you guys have some questions. Yes, please.
But I think you use these metaphors about the narrator and the literature history for the last 5-6 decades. We distinguish the reliable and the unreliable narrators. How would you put it in parallel with your ideas?
Could you please explain a little bit what that means, because I'm not familiar with this topic?
Basically, when someone narrates a story, can we trust the narrator tells the truth, or it turns out that he's lying, mentally not stable or anything, and it can be quite misleading for the whole story.
Oh.
So can you find a parallel?
Yes. Actually, there's a very interesting.
I assume so, but I'm not sure I'm thinking of the same. So.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So basically, your metaphor is about what is the term for it? The
reliable and unreliable.
Okay, reliable and unreliable narrator. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, this is not. It's my application of this idea, which I'm not that familiar with. I just heard about it from you 5 seconds ago. But there is this idea of, which I'm sure you might heard of in Kabbalah, which is called Shviras HaKelim. Did you guys ever hear about it? The breaking of the vessels. Did you hear of this idea?
I'm not familiar with it, but...
So let me explain what it is, just in short. The idea is that basically Kabbalah says that this process that we wrote down in the beginning, how God created the world, at first didn't quite go well. Why? Because at first, the light came through the vessels and it broke the vessels. And then God needed to remake the whole process and make different type of vessels. And then the light came through those vessels, and then everything was good. Now, if you ever heard of Tohu and Tikkun, so Tohu is the world of chaos, and Tikkun is the world of order. So Kabbalah says, in the first try of so-called, quote-unquote, try of creation, it was Olam HaTohu. It was the world of chaos, and that's why it broke. It means that somehow the vessels didn't quite get along, and the light just broke the vessels. Then our world is the world of order, and here the vessels cope with each other very well, and everything is in order. The Kabbalah says that actually the light which came through at first, and the vessels it came through, it was a much higher revelation. Sometimes a very high revelation cannot be ordered, it cannot be defined because it's so high. That's why it broke everything. But the source of it is very high. And we have traces of this world, this Olam HaTohu, the world of chaos, in our existence. These are called the sparks, the holy sparks, nitzutzes. The Kabbalah says that it's 288 holy sparks that we need to collect through our service of God. I'm not going to get into this whole topic in depth, but I just want to speak about the Shviras HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. So, what is the breaking of the vessels? Is when you have an unreliable narrator, and the light comes through this unreliable medium, and it breaks the light and the vessels. So there's two ways. When there is my light, right? I want to explain it to you. There could be two chances that might happen. Three actually. You might understand me correctly. You might not understand me, or you might misunderstand me, right? So if I have vessels that they are the right vessels, you will understand me. If I don't have vessels, you won't understand me. And if I have broken vessels, you will misunderstand me. You understand that? So if I have a misleading narrator, then it's not that I didn't get a content. I got the content, the source of the content is you. But I still misunderstood. Why is this important? Because the Kabbalah and Chassidus has a major problem with evil. And that's a very big theological problem in general. How does evil come to be? What makes evil? If the source of everything is God, then how come we have evil? And, there are other theological ideas that would say that there is two forces in the world. There is the Satan and the God. This is obviously unacceptable for monotheism. So then what happens with evil? How does evil happen? How does it get to be? And basically the idea is that it's through this shvira, this breaking of the light. So there is an energy. That energy comes through a medium, but that medium breaks it. And therefore it detracts it. What's the word? Detracts it? No, distracts it. What's the word? To get distracted. Distracts it. Is that the word? It turns it in a different direction. Derails it. So there's a nice example that is given to this. There is in the time of the Second Temple, there were multiple sects, Jewish sects. Most famous are, for example, the Tzdukim, I don't know how you say it in English. Sam, how do you say Tzdukim in English? Sadducees. In Hungarian, Szadoceuszok. And there were we had the different,
The Perushim and the Essenes are the other two big ones.
Who?
The Perushim or the Pharisees?
Yeah, but the Perushim are the Rabbanites, the Rabbinite Jews. And the Essenes, it's actually interesting because in the Talmud it doesn't mention it. It's mentioned in Flavius, but it's not a Talmudic. But the Talmud itself, I think it says there were 24 different sects. And then there's a whole discussion also about the sects in the Dead Sea, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were. if they are the Tzedukim or not the Tzedukim. Anyway, there were many sects. Now, the two sects that are mentioned in the Talmud are the Tzedukim and the Baitusim. The Tzedukim and the Baitusim. The Baitusim is not mentioned in outside sources, and according to some, it's really just another synonym to Tzedukim. But the Gemara, the Mishnah says that Tzadok and Baitus, they were both students of they were both it says in the Pirkei Avos who are the students of it's right in the beginning. Antigonus ish Socho, they were both his students, Tzadok Ubaitos. And he had a saying, and according to this explanation, the Tzdukim and the Baitusim were followers of Tzadok and Baitos. What went wrong with them? I mean, they were students of a great sage. Because this great sage said something which is quoted in the Pirkei Avot, in the Talmud. He used to say, Al tiyu ka'avodim m'shamshen sarav al nas l'kal b'pras, elo hevi avodim m'shamshen sarav shlo yamal l'kal b'pras. Don't serve God as servants that are looking for a reward for their service, but be like servants that don't look for a reward for their service. Now, what happened? His two students, Tzadok Abaitus, heard this teaching, and he said, "Oh, there's no reward. Forget about it. We don't want to be Jewish. If there's no reward, we're gonna make a new religion. We believe that there is a reward." What happened? He never said that there is no reward. He just said, "Don't be looking for that reward. Don't be serving God for the sake of the reward, but serve God in a much more honest or unselfish way." But they misunderstood what he said, and because they misunderstood what he said, based on that energy, they created something terrible. They created a new sect, which was against the Prushim, which was against the rabbinical Judaism. And if you ask, where does this energy come from? It came from a sage, their teacher. But on the way, the light broke. And because the light broke, this energy got distracted. It got derived. What was the word used? Derailed. And derailed. Okay. It got derailed. And now this energy is giving energy to something negative. So again, what makes the energy go the wrong way? Not the energy itself, but the kelim, the vessels. So that's, I think, maybe an answer to your question, if there is a...